Hello, everyone. Hello, friends of FSP, of the Financial Security Program. My name is Joanna Smith-Ramani. I'm the co-executive director of our program, and I am beyond delighted to spend the next hour with you all engaging in these really meaty topics of how to boost income and benefits, all towards a goal of increasing pathways to financial security. For those of you familiar with our work, financial stability is a precondition to really having any durable, intergenerational, reliable wealth opportunities in this country. It's highlighted in several of our papers, including 101 Solutions to Build Wealth and our New Wealth Agenda. And so we have to figure this out as much as we have to figure out what to do about the kind of assets people invest in and the kind of insurance they have. This event is our second in a series called our Future of Wealth series, where we are spotlighting the innovators, leaders, ideas, issues that are going to bring our country closer to our North Star, which is to 10x the wealth of households of color and those in the bottom half of the wealth distribution. Again, our paper is linked in the chat by my great colleagues, Talia and Emmy. So please dig in more to our 8 objectives of how we get there and what you could do to be a part of it. So today for this discussion that's specifically focusing on the role of income and benefits and household stability, which, as I said, leads us to financial security and wealth, we just have an embarrassment of riches in speakers. I'm telling you all now, I'm preparing you for this hour. We have Jen Pahlka, who founded and ran, among other things. All these people have done so many things. Google them, link in them. You will see just their quite impressive backgrounds and contributions to our country. But Jen founded and ran Code for America. She published a book over the summer called Recoding America, which we're going to get into in a little bit. Ginny Hunt just left the White House. She was leading their work on facing financial shocks. And Wole Coaxum, who's friend of FSP, family of FSP, through his company that he founded, MoCaFi, is really taking these kinds of ideas that those of us in our field and he himself are thinking about towards wealth creation and putting them into the market, building the products, the services, the infrastructure needed to actually substantively show differences in household balance sheets. So like I said, embarrassment of riches, truly amazing people. And we're gonna get started with Jen. Please turn on your camera and join me, Jen. So we wanna dig into a little of sort of the framing and foundation on how to really view income, benefits, things that come from the government to help with financial stability. Welcome, Jen. And as I mentioned in the opening, you just published Recoding America. I listened to, and everyone should listen to, this amazing podcast she did with Ezra Klein that digs deeper into the book, although he said not sufficiently deep enough. And in fact, and I feel like, I mean, I'm not friends of Ezra Klein, but I'm a follower of him. And he said, this is a must read for policymakers, which I suspect he doesn't easily throw around. Every book he reads is probably not a must read for policymakers. So I like, and I'll just say one other thing to get your reaction and then get into kind of you and what you have learned that can help us do this better for families. But I was laughing at the end of the interview when he asked you like what books you would recommend, and one was some like 1970s like book that essentially the theme was, and I wrote this down, but I probably don't have it quoted right, like why should we should all be surprised the federal government works at all. You know, like not we shouldn't be surprised it doesn't, but we should actually be surprised it's working. And I'm just wondering what about that like ties into kind of the work you've done and the way you're pushing us as a country to do this better.
Well, thank you for that great introduction, and it's wonderful to be here, and thank you for the work you do and for the great book plug. I love that you
picked with me to be like, this is what it looks like. Maybe you do, and you can show it to us.
The book?
Yeah.
I have it somewhere, but I'm not going to run. I'm not going to.
You're not going to run and get it. That's fine.
It's downstairs, but I bought a bunch of copies, and if anyone wants one and can't get it on, because it's out of print, I'll send it to you. So, yeah, that's a pretty good intro in the sense that this one part of the extremely long subtitle of this book from 1973, the actual title of which is simply Implementation, is, why federal programs work at all. And it's actually quite specific, I think, in that case to the ways in which the federal government creates programs, but then they have to be implemented through states and municipalities, and many stakeholders get involved. And there's a real gap there, I think, as it sort of descends not only through the hierarchy of federalism, but also the hierarchy of sort of policymakers down to the people who actually have to deliver the goods for the people. And that's ultimately what my book is about. So I was so glad to have found that people were talking about this literally exactly 50 years ago in 1973.
and bring it into the mix. Can you share a little bit more about what that means? That, and I've heard you say, and then I'll just let you know, trickled into our team, and it's now sort of our also framing motto. I don't know how to say it, like something that should be cross-stitched on my wall, but that implementation is policy. It is part of it. Like policy can't be separate from it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you like explain to us listening, and let me share with you who's on the call. It's people that care about financial security. It's people that work with policymakers. It's people that create like lowercase p policy in financial service firms, right? Or in state and local governments. This kind of policy that doesn't get implemented, right, happens at all scales. And I'm wondering what you mean by that, and then how you see us connecting them better.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just generally true that the general public does not read policy statements. So let's take SNAP, for example, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We can get into very erudite debates about eligibility rules, et cetera, but that's not how the public will engage. They will find out about the eligibility when they apply. So for them, always, I think the delivery is the policy. How they experience it is how they will feel about it, how they will feel about government. And your policy does not guarantee anything in particular about how if they're going to get the benefit and how they're going to feel about the government agency that offered them that. A good example of how this plays out in SNAP, for instance, is that, for example, in California, when the organization I used to run, Code for America, started working on food stamps, it was because California was the second to last state in terms of participation rates.
Wow.
And that does not make sense for most people because California is a blue state that is very pro-welfare. And it's not that we have incredibly restrictive enrollment criteria necessarily. In what we discovered there was that there was a form that you would use to apply. Actually, there were 3 different forms in the state of California. We worked particularly on one of them that worked for 18 of the California counties. And it had 212 questions. It did not work on a mobile phone. Many of those questions were frankly not only confusing, but insulting, asking questions about, the last time you traded your SNAP benefits for drugs, ammunition or guns or explosives since April 12th, 1992. It was very specific, weird questions. And the reality about the low participation rates was not because of policymakers necessarily, or it was because we were delivering the service poorly, and there was a disconnect between the policy intentions and the real world outcomes. And we see that really, once you see it, you will see it everywhere.
You can't not see it. Yeah.
You can't not see it, but you also can't see it. And if you're looking at a program from the top down, you can see it much more clearly. And you can make it better much more easily if you see it from the view of the person who's trying to benefit from the service.
And do you have kind of examples of where we've made some progress on that? Like what could be helpful for those of us thinking about this, again, in the benefits world, but also in the other spaces that we sit in, of where do you think from 1973 in that, 50-year-old book to Recoding America, there's been some good progress on how to connect better implementation and policy. And, I believe I've heard you say, but I know it to be true also, that it isn't a one-time thing, but an ongoing kind of feedback loop.
No, 100%. And it's a process. And I think where we've, I think spun our wheels for a bunch is, and I can blame myself and Code for America this for several years, is propagating the notion that what's problematic, what the problem is that we haven't invested in technology.
Mhm.
In government in particular, we've spent quite a bit of money on technology for the delivery of services. We have done something else wrong, which is that we haven't invested in the competencies and capacities within government to do service delivery well.
Mhm.
And that's not just programmers needed to program a web form. It's a way of thinking that privileges something called product management, as we borrow from the tech industry, which gives teams a framework for making decisions such that forms can work for people. Like, instead of the 212 questions, what are the questions that are absolutely needed, and how do we ask them in a clear way so that the service is designed for its users, meeting the needs of its users instead of the needs of government. That takes user research, it takes product management, but I think to further, push us away from this notion that we just need more tech.
Right.
It's not just different kinds of technology. It is, as you said earlier, Joanna, it's a way of thinking that says that the delivery is not distinct from the policy. And so you're going to need to have the people who are going to do the delivery and understand the users and understand their needs, not handed something at the end of a process,
Right.
but invited to the table from the very creation of the policy itself in the first place. I mean, way, 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 way earlier than we included them now.
Yeah.
And as an example of that, to point to, progress, for example, the Biden White House executed covidtest.gov right in the beginning of the Biden administration. I believe our colleague Ginny Hunt can speak to this when she comes on. And people experienced that as a delight from a user experience perspective and from a delivery perspective. It took about 11 seconds to input your information, and then you got your tests, a couple of days later in the mail. And that, while that seems very simple, it's absolutely true that if we had taken a sort of traditional requirements development process, everybody gets to throw their needs in from the government side. You could have easily asked, 40 or 50 more questions that were very burdensome, like, your insurance information, your vaccination status, like all of this stuff that would have made it a lot harder. But instead, I think, in fact, due to the advocacy of people like Ginny in the White House, the team that would be asked to deliver on this was brought in before the president ever said a single word about this policy that was going to come out, and helped shape it and helped make the trade-offs that would needed to be made to create something that delighted users and, of course, then built trust and faith between government and its citizens, which has been eroding.
Right, which then, plays into the next service, benefit, whatever you should be getting from your government. Having a good experience creates positive, cycle feelings, et cetera.
Absolutely.
I'm just wondering, from your experience, what do you think are the lessons for other fields? So in this case, we're specifically thinking about, and most of your experience, but I don't want to say it's all, but at least what I'm familiar with is really on how to improve government offered systems, benefits, ways that people have to interact with the government for the things that, frankly, like, we're owed, right? We pay for through our taxes, we expect for them through our government. But I just have to say, as someone who spent their career not in the government service space, but in the inclusive financial systems space, there's just so much that you're saying that resonates for me. And I'm wondering if you've had conversations about that, if people have come to you and said, what does that mean for financial service firms? What does that mean for? And I'm curious what you think those insights that go beyond kind of benefits delivery are.
Yeah, and I think we've come a long way in a lot of them. Some of this is maybe more specific to government than financial services, and there's a way that we have a long way to go still. So certainly, I think it comes down to, so much of it is, how do you create the structures and the environments and the ways of thinking that center the user? And not just center them, but provide them dignity. When you're talking about people who are in a tough financial spot, it's not just about, is it easy for them to use? how are you letting the complexity that is just inherent to both government and financial services hit the user, or are you protecting them from it? Can you simplify it in ways that sort of, pull that out? It's always there. It's not like you can just wish complexity away, or legal compliance or disclosures. But you can be inspired by services that, put those terms of service sort of a little bit back, and in ways that are still, ethical and accessible, et cetera. And you can remember that not only does it have to be simple, because you're talking about people who are under enormous amounts of stress, but it also should fundamentally treat them with dignity, because they're not going to use a service that that treats them as someone lesser in our society. And so often that happens, and we don't even know that we've done it, because we haven't tested it with users to get their reactions and see when they stop using something, and find out why. But I think while we've gotten a lot better at using these practices to understand our users' needs and meet them, I think we still broadly have a very kludgy system, by which I mean it's very patchworky.
Yeah.
And we're asked, any individual thing we want someone to do to increase their, financial stability or whatever, is like one of many things other people wants them to do. I can speak in terms of the safety net more clearly. We have so many social safety net programs instead of a social safety net. And each one of them has their burden. Each one of them has the ways in which we can really, turn people off. We want to help people with the specific financial need, and they have to qualify for that specific thing. And it really is an enormous amount of cost, both to bureaucracy and to the users, that is not serving us well. And that's why that's sort of the ultimate expression, I think, of this idea that we need people who are doing the delivery, pushing back up the policy decision chain, because ultimately, we need to return to this question: what are the outcomes we're trying to get? How are we going to get them? And question not just our user interface, but the whole design of our programs in the first place.
Yeah, it is, like, to call it a tragedy seems like an understatement, but it is a real tragedy in a country that has so many resources, that certainly at least has some amount, insufficient perhaps, but has directed some through policy, through our country's values that come out through policy, right, towards not wanting people to live in poverty, and not wanting children and older adults to live on the street, that actually the numbers aren't bearing out that we're making much progress, right? And that is ultimately like such a loss of contributions, of thriving of people in our country, of innovation, let alone the pain individuals are feeling. I have one last quick question for you, and then I want to alert Ginny and Wole. We're gonna bring you in to work through these issues all together with your innovative brains. But I just have to ask Jen. So Aspen is a humanist organization. We genuinely believe in like the goodness of people, right? That we all have a calling to contribute, that we have something bigger we can do in the world to help everyone. And I'm inspired by, something that comes out through your work, your speaking in your book, that this isn't not like we have a government full of bad actors and people that want to harm people, that we just have bad policy, and they are trapped in a system that doesn't allow them to be the contributors, right? The values-based people they want to be. And I'm just wondering, like, if you have any thoughts on how we help our leaders in government, like what we can do to show them that we want something different and more, but we don't think it's because they're terrible.
Yeah, no, that's been so key to my learning curve through government, which was sharp at many times. And I've had so many experiences of recognizing that things that I saw as incredibly frustrating or even evil were actually just the expressions of very dedicated, well-intentioned public servants. There was a time when I was working with somebody from the Office of Management and Budget on trying to publish a guidebook, essentially a playbook, and I really wanted to make it simple and clear. And this guy was making it 73 pages long, and then it was 83 pages, and I was trying to convince him of this. So I decided to tell him the story about how in Michigan, just as an example, one of the questions they ask public benefit applicants is whether they own a burial plot. And to me, this was like a perfect example of incredible obstacles that we throw in the way of people who are trying to access benefits. And this guy looked at me and he said, "Yeah, I know that, Jen. I wrote that regulation."
No, you're like, oh dear.
And he didn't write it to create an obstacle. He was just, what he heard was that Congress wants us to assess their assets. I'm going to do my best possible job to assess their assets.
All the assets one could have.
And and a burial plot would be an asset. And so, I want to do that, but he wasn't thinking about the friction that created for his users. So, I think just exactly what you said, Joanna, like starting from the place that mostly we're not trying to create problems here. And in fact, we're just trying to do the best job that we can. I think what leaders, fundamentally need to do, to be honest, is like challenge the culture. And it's the culture of government, but it's also our culture, right? That says what's valued is policymaking. And that's where people get to make important decisions. And then the delivery, what we need to do is sort of drain delivery of any judgment that's required. And they don't really have a voice at the table. In the British civil service, they actually call this out with the, I think, totally unappealing words of there's a class of intellectuals and a class of mechanicals. Now, we're not crass enough to use those terms, but that's actually
practically what's happening.
It's practical in our system, and it is not helpful. The people that we currently think of as mechanicals, those who will do the delivery, who will execute on these, brilliant policies, need to have a voice at the table, and they need to, more importantly, represent the voice of the user in this complicated dance of stakeholders. If we want to have real change, and it's not just like I have a user researcher on this now. It is a fundamental, totally different approach and way of thinking that's going to cut pretty deep into a culture that is runs deep in our society, not just our government.
All right. Well, on that, thank you. Let me invite Ginny and Wole to join the powerhouse team that is me and Jen. That was a weird way to say it, and I'm joking. I meant the three of you as a powerhouse. Although I will say, in honor of having such an amazing group of people, I poured my Diet Coke in a glass to look as classy as is this people that I have with. See?
Cheers.
I'm a big midday Diet Coke drinker, and I thought me chugging from the bottle would take away from the conversation we're having. Ginny and Wole, hello. I just want to give you guys a chance to say hi, and then I've got some stuff to get you into this conversation of how systems are really impacting the financial well-being of households in the U.S. But hello, friends.
Hello, it's great to be here. And thank you to Aspen FSP for always having critical conversations and bringing more people to the table.
Thank you for being here, Jenny. And Wole, how are you doing this afternoon?
Doing terrific, and so privileged to be a part of this conversation. So thank you.
Well, thank you guys for joining. So I know you were listening in. Jen gave us some themes that I was, furiously scribbling off to the side. That I'm just wondering your reactions to. She talked about obviously centering the user, but part of Jen, what you said that I found so interesting was not just thinking about the user as, ultimately, of course, it's the resident, right? The person receiving the benefit or the service from government, but it's also the person implementing it that is part of the centering the user. There's multiple levels of user that we need to think about. I really appreciated you saying, Jen, protecting people from the complexity of it, and trying to appropriately simplify. We talked about dignity, we talked about change management and culture change in government. And just to kick us off, I'm just wondering, what does that mean in the context of kind of how you both have approached these issues? And does it resonate? Would you add a key theme? Would you challenge Jen on one of the themes? And maybe Ginny, I'll kick off with you just to have you reflect on what you've been hearing.
That's great. Well, it definitely resonates. And I think Jen is accurate that culture change is required. And I think we're also lucky right now to be in a moment where we have leaders across the Biden-Harris administration and hundreds of career civil servants who have been working tirelessly to really demonstrate and collaborate with those that are centering financially vulnerable families and frontline staff and key partners across states and communities to show that when we do center them in our product, policy, or service design and are consistent and iterative and sort of tireless in ensuring that not just a site is launched, but the service works and we deliver good outcomes. Like that has been the heart of, I think, the charge and mandate for so many across both the administration and in this critical time. So I think the great note is that per Jen and many others, culture change is coming, and I think it is a great moment for us to galvanize.
And Wole, what about you from your private sector kind of experience working with government?
Yeah, no, I think government has a great opportunity to be a catalyst for change, right? Particularly as an entity that ensures that everybody, not just certain segments of the population, have access to high quality, low cost banking services in particular, or access to wealth building tools. And government, in my mind, often can play an important role in terms of addressing a market failure.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to do that, and I think, to Jenny's point, in terms of there are individuals at all levels of government who are committed to that. And with this moment, we now have technology, as Jennifer was talking about, that can actually take things that were an aspiration at one period of time and can make it come into fruition at this particular period of time. But I also think it allows a moment for new actors and players on the private sector side to bring the technology and innovation to the policy workers, if you will, that have been thinking about these issues for a long time, and bringing together the innovations that exist that the private sector is, laser focused on improving on a daily basis with the policy agenda that has been established. And so, for example, direct cash assistance is an area that people have talked a lot about, and we've put frameworks on in terms of how people can use those dollars. In some instances, SNAP's a good example, but now maybe we can think differently, and new players can help bring that thinking to bear.
Well, let me stay with you for a minute on this, because you are one of those new players. MoCaFi is one of those new players, and you and your just incredibly rock star team is working closely with different governments really to figure this out. I'd love if we could be like really specific for our listeners, our FSP friends and family on the phone about like, how does that look in action in the marketplace? And maybe you could describe that partnership you have with LA on moving money to people, on doing this in a way that is, reliable, predictable, equitable, as Jen said, importantly, with dignity.
For 1000%. So under the prior mayoral administration, Mayor Garcetti, wanted to create contactless government, so folks in LA City could have single sign-on for city services, and at the same time wanted a way for individuals to be able to receive money electronically, as well as pay for city services electronically. And this was sort of at the height of the pandemic when he decided to go after this particular framework. And you'd say, oh, that makes sense. So what's the big deal about that? But there are 500,000 people in Los Angeles who don't have a bank account. And so if you want to ensure that individuals have access to city dollars, and as you know, federal and state dollars oftentimes flow through the city, and then on a bank account, how do you do that? So we've stood up something called the Angelino Connect account. And the Angelino Connect program has two components to it. One is a disbursement account that allows us to get dollars to tens of thousands of Angelinos in a variety of different use cases. One, it was, hey, then they wanted to get dollars to people who had paid their street vendor fees, and with the pandemic, trying to get dollars back to people quickly so they could reinvest those in their business. They use our platform for that. And then there was a fire that impacted families who had been displaced, and they wanted to get money immediately to them so they could sort of get back on their feet. Then we broadened it to, they had a situation where individuals were eligible for the emergency rental assistance dollars, but the landlords weren't taking the dollars because they were using the fact that the individual hadn't paid their rent as a way to leverage the eviction process.
Yeah.
So the city ended up using our platform to get families over $20 million. In some instances, it was like $50,000 to a family, so they could pay their bills and not have the landlord hold them hostage. And then they also used our platform for one of the largest universal basic income programs in the country. They called the Big League program, where they gave 3,000 families $1,000 a month for a year. And so we've ended up, providing a framework that got $70+ million to families in Los Angeles. The other one was actually both Mayor Garcetti and now Mayor Bass used what we call a given program, where they provided $300 to 5,000 families at the holidays, so they have money to get groceries during the holiday season. But to your point around, it's on a debit card. It's branded Angelino. It's very attractive branding, and it doesn't have the stigma associated with it. It's just someone showing up with a pretty cool card, able to purchase groceries or whatever the function is. And we got free access to Wells Fargo ATMs, and as well as the Allpoint ATM network. So it really helps to bring people into the fold in a way that's has the primary focus of maintaining dignity, but also removes any of the frictions. They can get access to those dollars so they can move themselves forward.
That's right. And it's we all lived through the pandemic and remember how hard it was to get money to people for the various programs, from being out of work. What is wrong with me? Unemployment insurance. I'm like, remember when you're out of work and you get a check in the mail? I'm so sorry, everyone, that Diet Coke is not working. Unemployment insurance to any other kind of benefits. And so having this kind of infrastructure you can keep building on is really like how governments need to be thinking about payments, and some work we've been doing that I know my colleagues have been kind of throwing in the chat for people. I'll also just mention the overlap, Wole, with emerging work we're doing on the intersection of climate shocks and stressors and financial security, and certainly getting money to people in times of crisis is no small deal, and not working as well as we wanted to. Ginny, I love, so Wole gave such an exciting, hopefully what Jen would think of as like positive pushing against what we're normally doing example of how we are serving our community better with public-private partnerships. And I'm wondering how that fits into the work you've led on the Facing Financial Shocks initiative in the White House. And what else you guys are thinking about, kind of in addition to what the Woles and the MoCaFis of the world are doing.
Absolutely. Well, we were lucky to have an executive order in this administration that really charged all of us to put those we serve and their experiences and their outcomes at the center of our current programs and future programs. And as part of that, the administration also selected 5 life experiences that we see as critical for families that cut across programs.
Yeah.
Because as we know, that's where a lot of complexity occurs. And it's also when we're serving families when it matters most. So one of those experiences selected was for families and people facing financial shocks. And what we know, and a recent survey just highlighted, that 63% of employees say they couldn't weather an unexpected expense of $500. And what we also know is that 1 in 4 people who are employees also utilize public benefits at certain points in their lives. So it's really, requires looking at all sides to see how we can serve families best. And when we took this approach, we also wanted to be sure that we were building on the massive amounts of work that has been done across fields to serve families in critical moments of shock. And as you've said, stability and financial stability is essential for both building wealth, but also not falling into really unsurmountable debt spirals. So what we started through looking across the field was one of the programs we identified, it's really stellar, was the work done by Michigan under a Republican governor to ensure that families who are facing shocks and working hard to build financial stability could receive healthcare, food assistance, childcare, housing, and cash assistance, and enroll within a day. And timeliness matters. We also know that staying enrolled until they can build financial stability and security was essential. So part of what agencies have done across the administration is begin to collaborate through both a state accelerator to see how more states and places can learn from and build upon what works. We know Michigan's not the only model. There are many more. We also know that a big part of it is learning from and building and designing better benefits. And as Wole mentioned, cash is essential. Emergency cash and the monthly child tax credit have been both profound, both in their impact on child poverty, but also what we know in helping families weather financial shocks. And we also know that it should ladder to better jobs with better benefits. So there has been sort of an all hands on deck endeavor, truly led by many leaders across agencies who've been working on these efforts for years, but haven't always had a chance to collaborate as closely with each other and with states and organizations like Wole and many other frontline organizations in the field.
I'm curious, both Ginny and Jen, for you, this thing about the overlapping of different agencies that have different ways of being and different technology systems and different eligibility guidelines, except that I'm one household who needs to do them all. And both of you were part of the US Digital Service, which I don't know if everyone who is listening to us even knows what it is. So maybe one of you could give one sentence on that and how, I guess, what is my question? My question is, like, how is having, Ginny, a group like yours out of the White House, like, how is that changing culture about, or at least opportunity? Again, assuming good intention, good actors, people who want to figure it out, per Jen and my conversation. What is the kind of space they need to like have the right incentives to do that, so that from a person's perspective, like I'm living in LA using the Angelino card, and it doesn't matter to me which part of LA's budget is helping me with these funds, I'm getting them all through one card. So I'm curious what you think about that around incentives within government and perhaps with these financial shocks, these different life events are helping with that. Either one of you can jump off on that.
You go, Ginny.
Well, we're grateful to Jen for being the godmother of the US Digital Service, amongst many others. That's an office, as you mentioned, in the White House of technologists, designers, procurement experts who partner together with federal agencies and career civil servants to ship, right? And make sure delivery is done well and it's done consistently. I think Jen mentioned, the COVID test experience is one where truly the US Postal Service, is an exceptional organization. And all it took really was sprinkling a few people with a bit of time and giving us some air cover and elbow grease to be able to ensure that the service could both reach folks and test for millions and millions of tests were out the door quickly. We also see that in areas where we're also improving access to supports like healthcare and food assistance. And often means working with states. And so, as you've mentioned, that complexity can be hard.
That's
but
another layer of different institutions, incentives. Yeah.
Yes. And also I think where we also see a bright star is with the Treasury Department and both with IRS and the Fiscal Service, where there's really critical transformation happening and modernizing how the agency works in collaboration with USDS. I'll turn to Jen for more examples as well.
Yeah, maybe I'll give an example that is very much one of the USDS's successes, and I think illustrates both their ability to partner with other agencies for long-term transformational change, but also the kinds of behavior that gets to successful outcomes in service delivery. So there was a sort of the original team before we called it USDS were the folks that helped the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services recover healthcare.gov when it had its very rocky start, not a failure. It was actually quite a success in the end, but it had a rocky first.
It had a rocky start, yeah.
And they had a really big impact on that agency. I profile in my book a woman named Yadira Sanchez. She's been at the agency her entire career, and she'd never heard terms like user-centered design or agile development until this USDS team came in. But the real sustainment and masterful practice of those methods, she led as a long-term career civil servant. And after healthcare.gov is over, and she has now this language for sort of what she considers, frankly, a better way of working. She gets handed, or her team is handed, the next, big policy initiative comes from Congress. It's called MACRA, the Medicare Access and Chip Reauthorization Act. It doesn't matter, but this is a law that is designed to pay doctors better for better quality care. But what they immediately realize is that doctors are already so frustrated in dealing with CMS in these programs that they are kind of on the verge of revolt. And the only thing they like less than the very clunky systems that they're asked to use today is the idea of a new system that they're going to have to retrain their staff on. And, it's going to take money and time to sort of get up to speed. And they're all saying, when this new system comes out, especially the small practices, sole practitioners in rural areas, they're going to just stop taking Medicare. And that's going to degrade the quality of care that low-income and seniors, get, not improve it. And it's not because the website wouldn't necessarily stay up, which was the problem with Healthcare.gov. It's because it's designed to drive them crazy. And what she does then is not just, we're operating in the cloud, and it's none of these fancy text things. It's that she gets a seat at the table with the policy team interpreting these rules. So the first thing she's supposed to do is doctors are supposed to tell Medicare if they're a sole practitioner or a group, but there are 9 different legal definitions of a group. And somebody asked in the chat earlier about these over legalized things. And I think in a normal sort of way that this works, the team's well, it's 9 different definitions. That's what we're being told to do. We're not the policy people. We don't get to have a voice in this. But Dara and her team say, no, we can't do that, because if we do that, we are going to lose doctors from this program. And they fight on that point. And ultimately, they get 9 different definitions down to 2, not 1. But that's the first of several fights where they work to, in their words, make it make sense to a person. And in the end, because they do that over and over again, when they launched this program at the end, the implementation of it is called QPP, the Quality Payment Program. CMS at that point is so used to, a launch being a terrible day and everyone's calling to complain and the website is down. The website stays up and their call center is overwhelmed, not with complaints, but with people who are confused because they can't believe it's this easy to use. And they don't have a huge, mass exodus, and they don't have people in rural areas finding that their doctor will no longer take them, and they start to build trust and faith again. And so the USDS has a role in that, but the agency itself is the one who gets credit for, long-term doing this and for challenging the expectations about what it means to have a tech team and what that decisions that tech team gets to weigh in on.
Yeah. That's what, I'll just call out that you are also bringing up, just for, those of us trying to really process all that you all are talking about, another payment. We had been explicitly talking about a payment from government to me directly for a benefit or service I need, but there are also other customers, which is who is the service provider for whom that goes directly to. Well, you kind of brought this up around the landlord situation, but again, just trying to, for everyone listening in on kind of the complexity in the set of customers that exist in this space, right, that need to be understood. Well, I want to ask you about you having to negotiate, not any, specific stories that you and I should probably just have a glass of wine over and talk about what it's like to try to get a contract with government. But I'm curious about the trust part of all of this. I want to kind of bring it back to how this helps us just generally build a virtuous cycle and a functioning democracy, right? Where we pay in and support this government, they deliver back to us, we trust them to do what's right for us, we elect people we trust, all the pieces of kind of a government. And Jen had brought up trust before, and it's certainly implied in your work, Ginny, although you may have some comments too on this, but where do you think your role is? How does trust show up? Let me say that. And you being an extension of government, also in a, let's just be honest, a sector where there has been, for good reason, a lot of reduction in trust over the years, right, between people and their banks. How does that play into what you're doing? How do you think you're helping with it? Or how does the public-private partnership make it easier or harder?
So trust is it's fundamentally at the core of interactions between individuals and interactions between businesses and government. And you've asked, you've identified many dimensions of our work, right? One is procurement processes are an important part of how governments and other businesses are able to identify that they're working with the best provider and the best price, and being good stewards of scarce resources.
Right.
And so we very much appreciate and support and believe in good procurement processes. And sometimes you just have to be, and this, we've learned this in our experience, understanding of the fact that while there's a procurement process, there's also oversight to that process that may come from a third party, whether it's a comptroller or a county executive, if you will. And you have to sort of respect the process, right? And if you, because at some point, someone will say, hey, can you remind me how that process worked? And can you make sure that it was properly followed? And so and by doing so, and respecting the process, appreciating that the procurement process is an important part of it, by going through it and having it executed quickly and appropriately, then that allows us to provide a product and a service to the underlying consumer or the part of the community that we're intended to help, and say, you know what, we've been vetted, we've been evaluated, we've gone through the appropriate process, and our product reflects the best of what's in the market. And so love that part of the framework. And so that allows us to have a respectful and relationship with the individual. So that's part one. Part two, in terms of institutions and the relationship that banks have and other financial institutions have with communities, and the trust that I would suggest has been violated over the years in some instances for a variety of reasons. There are policy reasons for that. There are business imperative reasons for that, right? And but by that I mean, at the end of the day, you have, as a business, you have to figure out a model that's sustainable over time to serve a particular customer set. And that's why I'm so excited about this moment from a technology perspective, because customers that may not have been an attractive set of customers in the past because of the cost to serve brings that down significantly because of the technology environment that we're in today. So for example, the ability to deposit a check at a branch versus the ability to deposit a check on your phone, it's 1/10 the price, maybe 1/100th of the price. And so as a result, check deposits should be available to everybody for free, and the need for check cashers should go away because the cost to serve has gone down significantly. We still have more check cashers in this country than we do at McDonald's and other places. So clearly there's a disconnect in terms of what is possible from a tech perspective versus an industry perspective. But that's a long-winded way of saying, from where we sit, ensuring that we're going through the processes that government establishes for good reason, and then using technology to say, you know what, that individual who might otherwise be dependent upon a check casher is actually the customer that we want, and the customer that we can serve, and the customer we can help thrive over time. That's a little bit of a mind shift for a business who goes through appropriately so and says, what is the customer I want to serve, and how can I serve them in a low cost, efficient way? And we will love those customers, right? We would, folks who are the beneficiaries of HUD Section 8 vouchers, for example, or people who are living in HUD properties across the country, or new immigrants to this country. We love those customers, right? Because we see the opportunity to serve them well, to help them go on a path of credit building using rent or utility payments and the like,
Right.
put them on a path of using, digital services. Other institutions may not see the opportunity with those customers. And so anyway, you build the trust, and the other thing is, no amount of regulation, no amount of processes can take precedent over the values of the operating entity. So said another way, if at our core we care about making sure that people's data is protected, making sure that, you know, people have access to the best quality product at the lowest cost, making sure that it's a customer-centric offering. It's in languages that are accessible to people. That is at its core what's required. And then all these other pieces just sort of ensure that it's done on a systemic, institutionalized basis. But, you know, we're pretty excited, at least as our company, that all the things we've talked about, putting people first, operating with integrity, you know, asking the questions that the customer otherwise would ask if they were as informed as we are about how to provide high quality financial services. Anyway, I'm going on too long, but I get excited about these things because I do think that we're in a moment where there are models that are that you can institute where you can provide value to the underlying government entity or business entity or not-for-profit entity. You can provide value to the underlying consumer, and you can still do it on a business that's sustainable.
Right, and then you can start rebuilding kind of trust in the sector, and in your case, that is connected to government. Ginny, how does trust not show up? Like, how trust probably shows up philosophically and from a like values perspective when you were at the White House working in the facing financial shocks initiative. I can't get those two F's. I don't know how you guys said that every day. I don't know why. It's like too alliterative, but in the facing financial shocks, but how does it show up like in practice, like in how you think about implementation and solving?
I think it's at the core, and I think it shows up in practice. As mentioned, I think I'll lift up a lot of both what Wole and Jen have said, which is, you know, process is essential in making sure that, and principles we put in place, and not just our own work, but also the ecosystems for all of us who are serving the same customers. And so I think lifting up what Wole said, which is, you know, many of us are serving the same customers and people and families who are financially vulnerable and facing financial shocks. I think one of the things we took very seriously was how are we as a federal partner showing up to that and participating in that ecosystem with shared values, and how are we also ensuring that new actors, new startups, new organizations, and long-term organizations who've been on the front lines for decades are really essential to continuing to build upon that trust. So a lot of the work that both the customer experience effort laid out and now has really put in place with agencies is now an institutionalized process to ensure that the processes that agencies are using to understand their practices and their outcomes is central to their work. So I think we viewed it both as how can we put better practice in place today, but how are we institutionalizing trust at the center of how we do this work? The most recent digital experience executive order also reiterated this. So I think it's also providing a lot of air cover, frankly, for what hundreds and thousands of career civil servants have known to do best, but haven't always had sort of in writing per se, so the mandate and collaboration to do well.
Yeah, well, again, back to Jen's really important comment that like, these are human beings trying to do their best, right? For the most part, and they need the cover, they need the direction, they need the invitation. So speaking of invitations, look at my segue. We are almost done, and I have kind of one final question to you, which gets into invitations. So, you know, part of our work at the Institute is to help people, to invite people into action taking, to invite people into the leadership, the opportunities that they have in the place that they sit to build a better world and a better country for sure. Who else would you invite? You know, thinking about who else needs to be in these conversations around getting better, more user-focused, more dignified, reliable, what were my other words, equitable government benefits to people. Like who else is needed in the mix? Because they might be listening to this call. You could say a specific name, but I suspect you'll say a sector kind of person. But we want them in. We want them to join the work that Jen, you and Ginny really pioneered in the federal government, in the White House, in the U.S. Digital Service, and Wole that you are leading the charge of in the private sector. So maybe we'll start. I'm going to give a random order. We'll start with Wole, go to Ginny, and we'll end with our esteemed author of the book that all public policymakers need to read, Jen. To wrap us up on this question of like, who else? Who are we bringing to dinner in a couple days to get them into this work? Wole, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think the two actors, one is just the individuals that we're trying to serve, right? And making sure that their voice is very much a part of the solution. And sometimes we can suffer from sophistication bias. So it's always important to include the individuals. And the other is an extension of that, which is from a private sector perspective. I think, the financial services segment broadly defined, banks, insurance companies, and others just need diverse folks all throughout the levels of the organization, because people are bringing their shared experience to the solutions that these institutions are able to provide, and that's another way of bringing the voice of the customer into the mainstream, and that those individuals can become advocates internally, and they can also go become external advocates and do what I've done is leave that and bring the skill sets to the startup community.
Thank you, Wole. Ginny, what are your thoughts on who else?
I build on that and echo that. I agree. I'll second Wole's expansion. I also say there are many people across sectors and multiple levels of organizations who are innovating or trying new things, testing, and often innovations we talk about happens at the edges, and we often don't know what's working or what's even been attempted, and we're often rebuilding wheels.
Yeah.
And I think so for frontline innovators, many of whom are families themselves, to be honest, and I think doing so in very scrappy and bootstrapped ways, I think there's a real appreciation, respect, and awareness that this field will only grow if we're looking beyond our central institutions.
Thank you, Ginny. And Jen, last thoughts on this?
Well, I'm blessed to agree strongly with the two prior comments. And I guess in a sense, I want to say, not just policymakers, but lawmakers and our elected leaders, but I don't think they come along until we do. So I think we're on these webinars often in our sort of professional selves, but we are also all voters. We are people that candidates and current electeds go to for $1 and a vote, and I think what we tend to ask them is, do you match our values? And we want to elect people who care about the things we do. So we need to elect people, obviously, who care about the inequality in our society and the difficulties it is to recover from a financial shock, for instance. But we also need to ask them about implementation because they don't feel that it's their job right now. And we can't fix this without them changing their ways of thinking, bringing implementers to the table when they're writing policy. And if they don't hear that from us, that we just don't have much hope. I mean, what I try to tell them is, it's wonderful that you think of yourselves as gardeners, and the bill that you're going to write is the seed you're planting in the soil. But gardeners don't just plant seeds, they also tend the soil, and the soil has been depleted. And that soil is how we get the outcomes those policies intend. So we need to tell our electeds that they need to tend the soil. And I hope that we can all start doing that whenever we're in that environment.
So what I hear from Jen is that she is going to equip us all with the voter's guide to questions for policymakers about implementation, but I deeply, deeply appreciate that. I'll also offer that people can do that with their candidates. They could also run. Anyone on this phone call could run for some office too and become the implementer, policymaker, hybrid combination superpower. Thank you guys so much. I wish we were in a group of people because I could be like, see, wasn't I right about this like amazing, really thoughtful set of people that I just had to share. And I don't mean this, I mean this in the most genuine way, like my gratitude for your service to this country and the different roles that you guys have had. You could do just about anything, I suspect. I mean, I really believe in you're doing this and you've done this, and we are all better off and lucky for it. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to wrap up the call, so you can feel free to hop off your video if you'd like. I just want to thank everyone for joining today. There was so much more discussion we could have had. Again, these are just truly, truly amazing people digging into such important issues. My great colleagues have put in the Slack channel all kinds of references. But what I mostly want to do is make sure you join us again on Wednesday. I think it says November 8th. I hope Emmy won't kill me if I'm wrong. Same time, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern. And we'll be digging deeper in our Future Wealth series, and this time looking at how we democratize and de-risk real estate for wealth building. So going from financial stability to asset ownership through real estate. Thank you all so much for coming, and we'll see you in a month and a half. Take care.